You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we are talking about the 1988 anime classic, Akira.
But someday, we ought to be able to... Because it has already begun.
You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez, and with me today, Fan2Fan All-Star Nick Diak. Nick has been on the show to talk about Lovecraft, the world of Sword and Sandal media. You've written about it. You discuss it on your website, nickdiak.com. Nick, we're going to be talking about an anime that arguably is on the Mount Rushmore of anime.
Well, it's good to see you, Bernie. Thanks for having me on. So what's this anime that we're talking about?
Yeah, let's not tease it. We're talking about Akira.
Neo Tokyo is about to explode.
The 1988 anime movie directed by Katsushiro Otomo that was adapted from his manga. He agreed to film the adaptation on the grounds that he would retain creative control of the project. I remember watching this movie early on in what I would have called my introduction to Japanimation at the time, a term that's kind of antiquated now because it's certainly changed and anime has become more pop culture friendly. I guess that's maybe a way of saying it.
So I grew up with anime in the 90s, grew up in a small town. No one really knew about anime. If I wanted to talk about anime, I would have to go online, which, this is at the same time online is coming about. So AOL chat rooms and everything like that. There's only places like Sci-Fi Channel. Some are very early morning. You might catch a Sailor Moon, but anime was mostly advertised back in the 90s as being like very adult. And when I say adult, I don't necessarily mean pornographic, like hentai or anything, just adult in content. There was blood and violence and stuff. And I remember companies like US Manga Core and even Streamline was giving off was that anime was an adult type experience. And since I was a very young teen getting into it, I didn't think anything else of it other than, this is...
It felt like from its onset, it was marketed not as cartoons or not necessarily for kids, although obviously it appealed to kids and to teenagers, people like us that found it interesting, different from a lot of the anime, at least the anime that I grew up in watching in reruns that even at that time as a kid felt old to me. Things like Gigantor and Speed Racer, Voltron. Those things felt a little slow compared to like Thundercats or G.I. Joe or Transformers. They were things that would usually be on Sunday mornings, which is where, at least in my neck of the woods, that's where like cartoons would kind of go to die. Like that's where they would air Scooby-Doo or Flintstones because, it would be that treasured like 3:30 afternoon after school slot where you would get Darkwing Duck. But, if you wanted to watch Battle of the Planets or Star Blazers, well, that was like Sunday at like 5:30 or 6 a.m. And if I was up, like I'd get my cereal and I'd watch them. But I would have preferred to watch more Robotech because that felt closer to what I was starting to, the desires I wanted, something mature and something different, something that felt kind of like you were saying, a little bit maybe above my emotional ability to comprehend. But I knew I wanted more than just a cartoon.
No, I'd agree with that. Especially, I would say, again, back in the 90s, burgeoning internet, when you're kind of trying to find your, identity or getting into things. And this is, before an explosion of anime, not just anime, but comics to anime to even video. I mean, there was a time that Japanese role-playing games were not like, what is that? It wasn't until like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy came out. These were all more subaltern things. And there was kind of an element of being on an in crowd, even if you were the only person in that in crowd.
No, that's true. I mean, because I remember like friends who knew what Ninja Scroll was, who knew what the Berserk manga was, but they were the same friends that introduced me to Vampire Hunter D and Space Adventure Cobra. And when I started to see some of those like mid 80s to early 90s anime films, I always remember going to KB toy stores and they had a bin in the front with these discounted VHS, and G.I. Joe, the feature length movie, which I think was 1988 or something, 87. So that probably was a year or two after that when the VHS was released, going into that discount bin and grabbing it and just like lifting it up victoriously and saying like, Mom, Dad, I need to have this. But then like right underneath that was a copy of this thing that I've never seen before. And it had a really striking red cover, and it was called Revenge of the Ninja Warrior. And I'm sure I wore the living daylights out of that G.I. Joe VHS because it was just, well, it was G.I. Joe and it was cool. But I remember, I think I'll pop in this other movie and just being blown away because it was an anime film. It's also a ninja warrior. So it had my attention, and it was really neat. It was very original. It was basically like a ninja during like Western expansion, and he like ran into Mark Twain, and there was like a buried pirate treasure. It caught my interest, and then later on found out that it's actually called Blade of Kamui. They ported it over as Revenge of the Ninja Warrior. That was easy for me to interpret. Like, I think ninjas are cool. I like revenge. That seems like that's kind of interesting. And warriors are cool. So I'll give this a shot. But again, just like early like blips on at least my radar of what anime was, because it wasn't until you get into Akira that, yeah, Robotech is great, Voltron is great, Ninja Scroll is great, but then you see something like Akira and it's like, wow, you just kind of get blown away.
I'm in the very same boat, although your KB toy story, similar to mine, except for I fondly remember the discount bin at the beginning of KB Toys, right when you walk in, except when I would go, it was full of video games, so I would stock up on so many discounted Sega Genesis games. But no, my intro to anime, and I think we've covered this on a prior episode of Fan2Fan, was Vampire Hunter D. Before that, I don't think I really knew what anime was. I'd probably seen Voltron and Speed Racer, and to me, they were just cartoons. But I remember the very early days of Sci-Fi Channel, and that was probably the one, aside from Cartoon Network I watched the most, that they started advertising anime, and they were showing clips. And I remember making a conscious effort, I want to see this. And it was, the very first one was, Vampire Hunter D, and that was the not really red pill, blue pill moment. It was the pill.
Sure.
Afterwards, like, okay, now I know what anime is. Well, I mean, Vampire Hunter D isn't, a monolith for all animes, but it was a triggering point to say, I want to see more of what this is. And that would lead to going down a huge rabbit hole of all genres of anime. At the time, and I think even nowadays, I'm not really into the whole anime culture as I was back in the 90s, which was radically different than it is now. Anime is not the genre, that's just, it's the cartoon. But we took it all in because it was rare in the States. Yeah. You had to import it in Japan, and most people dubbed it. And, you just said, I wanted to consume anime, regardless if it was an ultra violent, gory film or something cute with a magical girl, from Akira to Sailor Moon. It was anime. And I consumed it all during the 90s with wanton abandon.
And like you said, it wasn't readily available, whether it was MTV, where you might get some clips, maybe like a Cartoon Network in the evenings where you might get that. And I remember at a time, and we started to see like Sailor Moon, Ronin Warriors, Dragon Ball. They were airing in the same time slots as Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers and Batman the Animated Series. It burst beyond like Saturday morning cartoons, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, that started to kind of make Japan culture, Subaraya stuff a little bit more hip than Spectre-Man or Ultraman. That's stuff that I grew up with, where it's like, hey, guys in rubber suits fighting, other guys in rubber suits type thing. Now we were starting to get a little bit more of drips of Miyazaki. And, I remember hearing about things like Ghost in the Shell and City Hunter and being like, wow, like, I don't know what this stuff is, but everyone seems to like this thing called Lupin or Wicked City, and not fully understanding it either, but just thinking this looks so different than everything else I've watched, not only from like Saturday morning cartoons and after school cartoons, but even from other anime that I've seen before too.
a lot of those animes that you've listed off is the level of detail in them.
Mm-hmm.
This is the era before, computer aided animation. So everything was still drawn by hand. In fact, I think even in Akira, like very little computer in it. Everything is, I think it's 99% by hand. And even before Akira, both American cartoons and Japanimation, there was the cheap way to do animation, the He-Man style, reuse the backgrounds, reuse the same actions and everything. But then you have a movie like Akira, but, in other films as well. Robot Carnival, you brought up Wicked City.
Oh,
whatever.
Good point. Yeah.
There was a craftsmanship that went into every frame. Like in Akira, you'd have a building collapsing and all these shards of glasses, or you'd have like someone firing a smoke grenade that would ping off the walls. You don't have to do that, especially in an animation, because those are extra frames, extra details, extra time to draw it. But they did. And it's incredible detail. And I think that was one of the things that helped, again, anime as a thing stand out in the night, especially with the anime that they were pushing in advertising, was these very well technically crafted artisan animes, from Ghost in the Shell to Akira.
100%. Do you remember the first time that you saw Akira?
I do. Well, okay. So this is a chicken and an egg thing. So I was definitely post Vampire Hunter D. So I would have learned of Akira after, watching Vampire Hunter D, going online, what's other animes out there. And luckily, Sci-Fi Channel would broadcast Akira every now and then. There was a regular line of animes that Sci-Fi Channel had the rights to that was put out by Streamline. So it's either A, I went to Hollywood Video and rented a VHS,
Okay.
or B, I caught it on Sci-Fi Channel, either doing Anime Week or Sci-Fi Saturday Anime.
You are watching the Sci-Fi Channel.
A city on the edge of insanity. A biker gang out for blood. A punk kid with a chip on his shoulder. Scientists, soldiers, and politicians fighting for control of a force beyond human comprehension, known only as Akira. Everyone ready? The apocalypse is about to begin. Our Sci-Fi Channel premiere feature, Akira.
But they both coalesced into a C option, where eventually I put my own VHS tape in and recorded it on Sci-Fi Channel, bumpers and all, and would watch it religiously. So it's one of those avenues, but definitely Sci-Fi Channel is heavily involved with me watching that first version of Akira. Even at the time, this is before I'm a film scholar or a pop culture scholar. I'm just a kid, watching this, very gory, adult, immaculately detailed feature-length cartoon and, wide eye, thinking, this is so cool.
So it resonated with you even then?
Oh, yeah. I think back then it probably resonated with me more as an anime action film because, it's still, first and foremost, it's still an action film. There's motorcycle chases. There's, people blowing up other people, telekinesis, big sprawling set pieces.
Yes.
It's an epic. You can't help but feel like small when you watch something that big, even when on the small screen, when a movie makes you feel that way, even when you're not in a movie theater, even when you're not in an IMAX theater or anything, and you're watching it on your CRT TV in your bedroom that's 14 inches long, and this makes you goosebumply, that's Akira. And then, of course, rewatching it, I've watched Akira many times, but even rewatching it for this episode, you pick up on, within the action, there's, themes, they're very, Japanese centric themes, but they still translate over. In fact, I would say Akira is very similar to Seven Samurai in the way of not just craftsmanship, but even though like the underlying is they're not Western films, and I don't mean Western restaurant, Western audiences, they both appeal to a Western audience, which helps boost their, international consumability. I think the themes and stuff of Akira are very Japanese, but it's presented on a plate that it could be Western consumed, and you can take that all in. So even rewatching Akira, just picking up on things that are subtle to me are probably big deals to others, but it's just a wonderful smorgasbord of here is Akira as a behemoth, and here's everything for it.
And it's funny you brought up Seven Samurai, because it's a film that always gets named in, those top 100 AFI type lists, because I think there's a global recognition that Kurosawa's film is masterful, that, like you mentioned, it has themes that appeal to different audiences, different cultures, regardless of it being, taking place, it's an era film. So it takes place in a very specific culture with certain tenets that might be more like readily understood by a Japanese audience, but it transcends. But it transcends 100% to the point where you can almost take the film as is, and then we get Magnificent Seven, and we get other variations of it, where we've kind of talked about on the side how we should end up doing an episode on folks that have kind of adopted the Magnificent Seven style theme, where you get like Battle Beyond the Stars, right? But I think that just shows you that when you put Akira in the same group picture as Seven Samurai, it's because they did a lot of heavy lifting in appealing to just more than their audience. Like, it's more than just a film for Japanese moviegoers. It's a film that I discovered at a local Suncoast for an overpriced VHS. But, compared to things like a Bubblegum Crisis, where we were used to paying $39.99 for maybe like 2 20-minute episodes or something, or, I would have friends who would get, is it a Ranma half? And those were seemingly endless, and they were paying $19 for 1 or 2 episodes. And in hindsight, I'm like, I don't know where I got that money, but I found it.
The following offer is for mature audiences only. Exciting, mysterious, intense, graphic, provocative, raw. This is no ordinary animation. This is the exotic, bizarre, and beautiful world of Japanese anime. And this is your invitation to enter with the modern classic Akira. Critics say Akira makes Blade Runner look like Disney World. It's action-packed, the future of animation. Siskel and Ebert call it the video pick of the week. Akira is yours for only $4.95 with subscription when you order the Best of Japanese Animation Collection Series. With these state-of-the-art sci-fi classics, you will enter a world beyond imagination, a future out of control, and an experience you will never forget. Don't say we didn't warn you.
And for Akira, themes is probably a good place to dig into this with, Nick, because every time I see it, I see more. And I think that's just, as we get older, as maybe the aperture opens up a little bit more and you get beyond action, sci-fi, cyberpunk, maybe the aperture opens up and you realize how impactful, how influential it was to the cyberpunk genre. But then, like you mentioned, there's this psychic telekinetic subgenre. You get the politics, the corruption, terrorism, religious fanaticism. That's all like in there. But I think as you revisit the movie, some of that stuff seems to pop more in the foreground than just really cool motorcycle chase.
There's something on my mind as I was rewatching it the other night. One of the things about Akira is it dives, deep into, what makes us us. It goes into a little bit of, talking about, energy within inside us. And that kind of resonated with me, not in a philosophical way, but it's a movie that depicts energy. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the entire movie is very kinetic, not, they're talking. Okay. Let me try that again. So, they're talking about, where we come from, energy stored in our cells, memory of the universe, nuclear bomb going off, all very energy. The movie itself is very, kinetic with the motorcycle chases and various, chase sequences and everything. But it's not just a kinetic energy. It's a potential energy. And it dawned on me what it made me think of. Have you ever read or seen Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?
I have seen the movie, yes.
In both, Hunter S. Thompson, he gives the wave speech. It's totally the wave speech where he's talking about San Francisco in the mid 1960s, where, there's this energy going on. You're at the right place at the right time. It's more of about hippies trying to change the world. There's, at the cusp of something big. And I think Akira is like an embodiment of that wave speech, because there's something big in Akira, not just outside the movie, because it would help launch Japanese animation, but even within the narrative of the film, it's a world-changing film. It's 30 years after, World War III. They use analogies like the city is very ripe and about to explode with possibilities and everything. It's, the protesters and students all rebelling and everything. It made me think of that it's at the cusp of something big is about to happen. And guess what? Akira, something big does happen. Akira arrives and it explodes and everything. It actually delivers on that, energy that it is postulating.
That's a good point you brought up, because the movie doesn't feel like a 2-hour movie.
No.
It moves at a very quick pace. Again, the more you rewatch it, the more it kind of begs you to pay more attention. And the less I pay attention to the cool motorcycle chases, and mind you, there's a lot of them and they're very, very cool.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that's a good point you mentioned, that the movie is just a tension balloon moving towards something. And you can tell that the vibe, the atmosphere, the tension in the riot police, the rioters, the gangs that are fighting each other, a lot of stuff happening in Neo Tokyo, and that all of these things are going to come to a head. But it's also interesting too, that while the movie is kind of showing you this little snapshot of this moment as things are about to kind of like blow up, but it's still reaching back to the moment that happened. And I forget how many years it was in the movie, but it seemed like it was 30 years ago in the movie. You have the actual Akira explosion that they, then sweep away and call it a nuclear explosion, and, the beginning of World War III. Because there's also, because I think of the emergence of that cult and the messiah figure of Akira, when he comes back, things are going to be good again. And it feels like there's a sense of like poverty and classism and government control. So everyone's kind of not doing well. Well, maybe it's something else outside of us, something bigger than us. And that's Akira. So we'll hitch our wagon to the messiah, savior, someone who's going to come in and make things right for us. Then Tetsuo ends up becoming, their messiah, or not so much, right?
You say messiah, and it makes 100% sense. I never put 2 and 2 together of a messiah figure in Akira, and it totally is there. But you take like a messiah character like in Dune or something, where they rise and saves the day or whatever. I haven't read all the Dune stuff, but it's funny that the messiah character in here, this is like, well, let's blow it all up and start again.
Yeah. Well, when I think
that's the way to do it.
When I think of Dune, and it's because it's in the sci-fi group picture with Star Wars. I think Joseph Campbell hero, right? So once the kid learns the lesson, she or he will then meet a wizard, and then they'll learn stuff, and then they'll save everybody, right? Versus this one, where it does have that feeling more of like the cultists, the fanatics that are kind of meeting together, rioting, protesting, crowding together in the streets because they're like, chanting like Akira's coming back. And then again, Tetsuo shows up, and he's not interested in any of that. No, because he's kind of grown up, right, in like the ruins, in the shadow of what Tokyo was. Doesn't seem like he's fared well. He's the kid on the other side of the tracks. He
has his own agenda, which is definitely counter to everyone else's agenda. And we're talking about themes and stuff. One of the other themes that I wouldn't even thought about 20 years ago because the term didn't exist, but it touches on things like toxic masculinity. You have Kaneda and Tetsuo, where they're friends, but there's a hierarchy there.
Sure.
They care about each other. Okay, side note, there is as action-packed and gory, whatever Akira is, there are some elements of very dark humor in it that I love.
Yes.
But it's I think one of the funniest but kind of poignant lines in the film where Kaneda says something like, Tetsuo is my friend, therefore, I should be the one to kill him. and one, that's a very macabre statement, but two, it kind of wraps that up like, well, he is his friend 50%, 90% of the time, whatever, even though he kind of picks on him, but kind of doesn't, but he does look after him. But, sometimes you do have to grow up and, get away from, being in the nest. I'm not saying Conan is a father figure or anything, but I guess.
But he's certainly like a bigger brother that has.
Bigger brother. That's man. Okay,
there's some paternal instincts going on there. Not necessarily like you said with the best of intentions. There's bullying and pushing him down and letting Tetsuo know he's in his place. compared to the hierarchy of this gang and where Kaneda sits.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that Tetsuo, because we're exposed to him, he's an abandoned kid. He's left off at a school. Kaneda becomes his only friend, but, he doesn't have a past. And all of a sudden he's gifted with all these powers. He still doesn't have a past, and he's trying to claim what a future might be. He wants to run away with his girlfriend Koi, or he wants to, get a better bike than Kaneda, or at least be a notch above him. Sure. He wants a something. And, once he's granted his powers, he thinks, Akira might give him that something.
Yes.
He's a tragic character. He's an extremely tragic character. One that just happens to use telekinetic powers to blow people up.
But I think that's, again, where the movie is so interesting, and again, makes sense why we're still talking about it now after, it's been released for so many years. The fact that it's still highly regarded at a time when we were growing up, our access to anime was limited. Mm-hmm. But anime was limited as well. Like, there were not nearly as many series, movies out there that were available to us as there are to people now. Again, the different genres that manga and anime cover seem to be a lot more varied. Anime has been able to, sometimes it's fantasy. And I remember watching Record of Lodoss War, Street Fighter, or, there was so much out there that it never got pigeonholed. But even with more options and more access to anime in its different forms, it's like Akira was always heads and tails above.
I'm going to throw something else out there. What makes this movie really great and accessible. We watch a lot of films or TV shows or read comic stuff as, escapism. We like to, picture ourselves as the protagonists and go on these outlandish, spacefaring adventures or hiking mountains or whatever, big epic Star Wars combats and stuff. But we all know, like, kind of in the back of our head that would never, like, happen to us. Like, us in the real world, what's the probability that, tomorrow you're going to jump into a land speeder and take out a UFO or something? It's pretty nil. And usually, some films get around that by, having like a Messiah type character or a chosen one type character. Oh, it's been in your destiny to take up something. All those all seem like out of reach of us. Like, we can imagine ourselves, but that can never happen to us. And even though Akira has like a chance encounter in it, Tetsuo runs into subject 25. Takahashi. We'll go by his real name.
Impressive you remember the name, Nick. I would have just said that little Esper kid that he runs into.
But even though that's like the random encounter, there's that line of when Kaneda and the lady he's pursuing and having a terrible time with because he is a
I believe. K-E-I.
Yeah. She's kind of giving like the backstory of what we talked a little bit earlier, like energy in the universe, memories in us. And the idea here is that inside all of us is, the memories of the universe, what makes the universe great, expansive, what it is, right down to our atoms. I mean, it's all, contained with us. And, it just happened that one chance encounter with, Tetsuo and Takashi, jumped that. But it implies that, but that capability is within all of us, whether through training, our regiment, our happenstance, or that we could actually become, more than we are. And, take that as you may. And in this case, Tetsuo took it in a very bad way. He destroyed an entire city.
Well, I think that's where like the read you have has the maybe like the idealized version where, with the right amount of training, time, effort, mentoring, you can unlock those powers in you. But then maybe there's also the other read that maybe sometimes access to that will just reveal what's already inside of you. And it seems like in Tetsuo's case, there's just a lot of angst and a lot of things that lead him down his path.
But I think one of the things that Akira does present, that might be more of an Eastern thing. And again, I'm not a philosophy or religious person, but it does posit that within inside us, there's definitely something greater, right, wrong, indifferent, good, evil, whatever. And I kind of like that idea, that it gives us kind of a little warm and fuzzy that we are, specks in the universe, but maybe we aren't so meaningless after all. And I think, through the motorcycle chases, the action sequences, the we're talking about how futuristic this movie is. And even though it takes place 30 years ago, it's in our past already because it takes place in 2019. But aside from like the architecture of the big megalopolis, when you get down to like the ant level of people in the streets, automobiles, tanks, and everything, it's not that futuristic. It's still it's not like Bubblegum Crisis. And it's,
sure. Oh, good call.
No, I love Bubblegum Crisis, by the way. The soundtrack for Bubblegum Crisis. Oh, but it's funny that aside from CRT TVs in the absence of smartphones, in real life, we don't have those megalopolises yet. We're still driving cars that look like they're from the 90s.
Sure.
It's funny that Akira has, I think, aged well, but also aged concurrently, that you could watch Akira now and know it's the future, but at the same time, it's not like a Jetsons type future of domed cities and flying whatever. It's still like a future that we can still grasp and comprehend. It's not so fantastical. And I like that. It just makes it a bit more grounded and a bit more, like it's what I said earlier, more accessible that it could happen to you.
Remember, you can find the Fan2Fan Podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan2Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN.
On Instagram at Fan2Fan Podcast.
Or on Twitter at Fan2Fan Podcast.
We'd love to hear from you, so send a message and let us know what you think of the show. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
I found a few things just on the release that I wanted to make note of because I thought they were kind of striking. So it did have at the time like the highest budget of an anime at $9 million, but I wanted to have some comparison here. So Nausicaa of the Wind was about $1 million in its production. Steam Boy, also directed by Otomo, was $22 million, almost twice as much. But then just to have some context, Oliver and Company, when we start talking about like Disney movies of that era, right, was a $31 million production. But like you mentioned, building collapses in Akira, you're just like blown away by the amount of detail, the craft, the artistry, the nuance that's involved in depicting a lot of the scenes. And I think a lot of that comes in not being an animation expert, but you can certainly see it on the screen. You don't have to be to see it. So I guess the Akira animation there are 24 complete drawings for every second of animation on screen. And that translates into about 160,000 hand-painted animation cells. I'm sure there's a great math equation on how much carpal tunnel that created, but that's where you get that fluid animation for the 125 minutes that just looks so different and so great, even so many years after its release.
Your analogy of all the frames and stuff makes me think of, computing, 20 years earlier of punch cards where, where a computer program would be a stack of punch cards, yay high. And I'm like, I can just imagine the Akira, hand-drawn frame cells being yay high.
But you know what? I'm gonna run with your computing analogy there. And where like Moore's Law might apply to computing, it's interesting that at least with Akira, the very limited use of CGI compared to productions now that rely on CGI. But because of that, there's something handcrafted. There's something very artistic, insanely artistic in the craft behind Akira that doesn't, I don't want to say it makes other productions that use CGI any worse, but when you see them lean on it or use it as a crutch, sometimes it sticks out a little bit more. I get why they would use it. So no shade on the people that use it. But again, I think it's just more points for Akira for just being that damn good and not having CGI as a resource at the time.
I can't even comprehend, going in and doing, individual cleanups of a frame and some sort of CGI piece. So I see it as two different, crafts, but maybe just because of the manual effort of Akira, because that is a very intimate being there, hunched over, drawing on the animation cell. I don't know, there's just something that just comes out of it that even like other cartoons from the 80s and before, even the He-Mans and stuff that use recycled stuff, there is that a nostalgic charm to it, or an amazing painting-like quality to it.
For sure.
And you know what? There are scenes from Akira that, are totally replicated, either the city shots or driving down the freeways and stuff. Those are practically, take a screenshot and you got a painting there.
But you also mentioned nostalgia, and on the show we've covered the Transformers movie from the 80s, the animated movie, the G.I. Joe movie, but those were super accessible because if you didn't see them in their limited theatrical release, you didn't find them at a KB Toy Store's discount bin, then all you had to do was wait for them to release it on TV after school, versus Akira, where, at a time when anime typically did not get released in theaters, at least here in the US compared to Japan, but it was also, anime was not nearly as respected, and it wasn't easy to find because it wasn't available in a time slot after school. Like you said, you found it on Sci-Fi Channel, Cartoon Network, because they saw that there was a demand for it. Like you mentioned earlier too, you have like the internet starting to emerge, online fan communities are building up, and people actually are maybe finding like fans that know about things like Akira and they're sharing it with each other. Check it out. Then someone watches it and it just blows your mind. I mean, I put this Akira more in the category with things like Fire and Ice and Heavy Metal.
I want to use that to segue to a very personal story that ties into Akira. Heavy Metal has a sequel called Heavy Metal 2000, and it's okay.
It's a sequel to Heavy Metal. We'll say that.
It's a sequel to Heavy Metal. But
yes.
The writer for it, his name is Robert Payne Cabine. I met him. Oh God. So Michelle and I moved to Southern California at 2010 and, doing the con circuit, meeting a lot of people. We befriended, a husband and wife couple that ran a publishing, they still do. They're kicking butt, called Fan2Fan Press.
Okay.
And they were about to put out a book called Fearworms by Robert Payne Cabine. And of course, since I was friends with them, I became friends with Robert. And, and Robert he's worked in Hollywood forever and, getting to talk to him about everything. And it turns out back in the diggity day, he and his wife worked at Harmony Gold, which became Streamline. And he was one of the folks that helped brought Akira over. He's an artist. He's both an artist and a writer. So a lot of like doing promotional stuff.
Some promotional or advertising capacity for the anime.
Yeah, I mean, I think the people behind Streamline, they wore many hats. But he worked a bit on the English, release of Robot Carnival and Akira and Wicked.
Oh wow,
City.
okay.
So he was all part of that. So he told me a couple stories working at Streamline, and of course, me, first meeting him, and he's telling me all this stuff. I'm like, oh my God, you helped bring over the stuff 20 years ago in my youth that would have a big impact on me. Well, he has a friend who also worked at Streamline. Her name is Wendy Horowitz, and she also worked behind the scenes and did promotion work, but also uncredited voice acting, if you needed a girl to scream in the background. And so, I met her and talked to her as well and befriended them, and they both signed my copy of Akira. But, she was telling me when they first brought Akira over, it was for them, because Streamline was a small company, or, compared to, Disney and whatnot. But,
sure.
Them bringing Akira over was a very, very big deal. And, they were saying the theaters that they were able to get it to had Star Wars lines coming out the, whatever. But, one of the things that I fondly remember that ties into me as a writer was I was talking to Wendy, and she was saying, we had so much promotional material for Akira and everything. I have some of that. I'm going to give you some. I'm like, oh, that would be nice. And so some X amount of time happened, and I was there's a magazine I write for called Exotica Modern. It's a tiki magazine.
Okay.
And it has nothing to do with Akira, but they had their launch issue at the Tonga Hut in North LA, and the editor said, hey Nick, do you want to go and be a guest there and sign? I'm like, holy smokes, yes I do, because I've never done a signing before. So this is me as a writer, oh my God, get me at a signing event, So there I am at a tent with the editor and the artist of this magazine, and there's me who just wrote an article on this old noir film called While the City Sleeps. And there's a line out there, and sure enough, Wendy Horowitz, shows up. She has a tiki outfit on. Nick, I know you were doing a signing here, and I brought Akira swag for you. And she had a T-shirt and these booster packs of trading cards. And so there I am at this moment of my first like big signing as an author. You know, this person that helped bring a movie over that I cherish so much, giving me his like vintage 30-year-old promotional swag. It was a very cool moment.
I can only imagine, especially like I was reading some of this, doing some research. There was a streamlined dub that first premiered on Sci-Fi Channel in the 90s during one of their Saturday anime blocks. Do you think that was probably the version that you first saw when it aired?
No, absolutely. No, that's the one I grew up with, was the streamlined one. And I know, back then there was that, dub versus sub debate. To me, it was anime. I will consume it all. So, the version of Akira I have now is the newly dubbed version that's on Blu-ray. But, there's still sparks of it when I rewatch. Like, I just remember the old streamlined one, different words that were used, different voice actors and stuff. But the streamlined one is definitely the one I would have rented, saw on Sci-Fi Channel, recorded off Sci-Fi Channel.
Sure. And I think the second one that came out, wasn't it the Pioneer dub that aired after that?
I think so. I think Fanimation / Pioneer is like the main release subtitled version of it now.
I was trying to kind of follow the track of the release of it, because it was released on VHS, like you mentioned. Streamline had the original release. At some point I read it basically led to the creation of Manga Entertainment, and they took over the release for Akira, but it seems like they were able to continue to keep it available. And then at some point, then, like you mentioned, Funimation Pioneer then does another dub of the film. But I believe from what I was reading, that seems to be the dub that's now available on the releases. And there was a commemorative 25th anniversary release of the Blu-ray. And again, just to show folks how like easy this is to find, I was literally, that's the one that Nick is holding up on our audio only podcast. This is also the one that I have. Ironically enough, I'm walking through a Target with my wife, and there's just a copy of the Akira Blu-ray. And mind you, if you've gone to Target in the last few years, their selection of physical media has decreased substantially. So I thought there was some sort of there was some sort of kismet pointing to the shelf saying, Bernie, you don't own a physical copy of Akira. And then I would go to the universe and say, universe, you're right. I remember borrowing it to someone and never getting it back. I should get it. And the universe saying, well, here it is. And then who was I to argue with the universe? So of course I bought it.
I love Akira. When I was younger, I probably would have said, that the two pedestals are Akira and Ghost in the Shell. If I had to end on something else, it's not necessarily about Akira, but like cyberpunk in general, because there was that period of, cyberpunk wasn't just an aesthetic, which it certainly is. It's also a lot of early to Matrix era cyberpunk was a lot of existential, like, who am I? Am I, from Blade Runner, the difference between a human and a robot, to Akira of what makes us up as beings, to even Matrix of, is my reality, a facsimile or whatever. There's always like this existentialness. And Ghost in the Shell as well, that same as Blade Runner. Who am I as a person? Am I what my identity is and everything? All those cyberpunks kind of address that existential of what does it mean to be a person. And that's kind of something that Akira adds to the conversation with, adds to the discourse of great cyberpunk in both an aesthetic sense and I guess a philosophical sense. And it's just a fantastic film.
And it just does it with a really cool animation and cool explosions.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. That was great. That was awesome. Thank you.